He used to think money was the answer to everything. The noise would stop. The fear would fade. But when he finally made it, the silence felt heavier than before. He looked around at the richest people he'd ever met and saw the same restless eyes, the same search for meaning behind their smiles. Maybe freedom isn't what you buy, but what you understand. This is the story of how a poor boy learned that even the richest hearts can still feel poor. He grew up in a small apartment on the edge of the city, where the walls were thin and the nights felt longer than they should. Every morning he'd walk past the same glass towers that caught the sunrise before anyone else. From the street, those buildings looked like freedom. Inside them, he imagined people laughing, drinking coffee that cost more than his breakfast, and talking about futures that didn't include fear. He promised himself that one day he'd walk through those same doors not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged there. For years, money wasn't just a dream. It was a language he wanted to learn. He watched his parents stretch every bill, listened to the quiet tension in their voices, and decided he'd never live that way again. He studied late, worked early, and said no to things that didn't move him forward. When others went out, he stayed in. When they rested, he built. Slowly, his effort began to show. A new job. A better apartment. A little more in the bank. The city began to look different, like it was opening doors instead of closing them. But success has a strange way of shifting the goalposts. What started as survival became competition. What used to feel like progress turned into pressure. He met people who were richer, faster, and always chasing something bigger. The conversations changed. They talked about investments, not dreams. Vacations, not peace. Everyone wanted to look successful, but no one looked free. He found himself waking up at 3 a.m., scrolling through numbers on a screen, wondering why the peace he'd been chasing still felt so far away. Then came the day he finally entered one of those glass towers for real. The office smelled like coffee and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows, views of the skyline, and a corner desk that once seemed untouchable. He thought he'd feel proud. Instead, he felt small. The people around him had everything he thought he wanted, yet their eyes told a different story. They spoke in careful tones, laughed without warmth, and checked their phones between every sentence. Their lives were expensive, but their spirits looked bankrupt. He started noticing things he'd ignored before. The way someone's smile faded as soon as they turned away. The quiet sighs behind closed doors. The constant hum of anxiety that filled the room, masked by confidence and caffeine. He realized that everyone was running, not towards something, but away from something. The fear of losing it all was louder than the joy of having it. And in that noise he saw himself, still running, still afraid, still believing that more would mean enough. That night, he stood by the window long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights flickered below him like tiny sparks of hope, but none of them reached where he stood. He thought about his younger self, staring at these same buildings from the street. That boy believed freedom lived up here. But looking out now, he saw how trapped people were in their own success. They had wealth but not rest, status but not security. He began to wonder if the price of success was simply trading one kind of fear for another. Over the next few weeks, he started asking quiet questions. What does it mean to be rich if you're never at peace? Why do people chase wealth as if it will cure loneliness? He listened to the stories of the people around him, those who had made millions, yet confessed they felt like they were losing themselves. The honesty in their words hit harder than any number he'd ever earned. That was the moment something began to shift. He no longer wanted to escape poverty. He wanted to escape the illusion that money alone could make life meaningful. So he began to change his rhythm. He stopped saying yes to everything. He took time to breathe, to walk, to sit with silence. He realized the richest feeling wasn't buying something new, but waking up without dread. Slowly, the anxiety that had ruled his life began to quiet down. He learned that peace doesn't come from having everything, it comes from needing less. For the first time in years, he felt free not because of what was in his account, but because of what he'd let go of. And that's how the boy who once dreamed of wealth discovered a deeper kind of richness. He learned that the same fear lives in every income bracket, the fear of not being enough, not having enough, not doing enough. But when he stopped measuring life by numbers, he started to feel human again. Freedom, he realized, isn't about escaping poverty. It's about escaping the noise that tells you your worth depends on what you own. And in that quiet truth, he found something that money could never buy: peace. When he was poor, he believed wealth was the cure for everything. The fear, the struggle, the constant uncertainty. He thought that once he earned enough, the weight would lift and life would finally feel safe. But when he began working alongside the wealthy, he noticed something unsettling. They had the same restless energy, the same tired eyes, the same hunger he'd spent his whole life trying to escape. It wasn't poverty that haunted them. It was the idea of losing what they had built. They weren't living with freedom. They were living in quiet panic. At first he couldn't understand it. How could people with millions still feel anxious about money? How could success feel so fragile? But the more time he spent around them, the clearer it became. Their lives were full, yet their minds were never still. Every conversation revolved around more. More profit, more property, more power. They measured life by what they could accumulate, not by what they could enjoy. And deep down he realized he had been doing the same thing all along. He started thinking about how it all began. The first time he checked his bank balance and felt powerful. The first time someone looked at him differently because of what he owned. Those small victories had felt like validation. But over time they turned into chains. Every win made him crave another. Every purchase brought temporary comfort that faded faster each time. He had become addicted to the chase, just like the people he once envied. They weren't rich because they were free. They were rich because they were afraid to stop. One evening, after a long meeting, he sat in a dim hotel lobby waiting for his ride. Around him, businessmen scrolled through their phones, eyes glazed with exhaustion. Laughter echoed from the bar, but it didn't sound real. He overheard a conversation at the next table. Two investors, both in suits that cost more than his first car, whispering about how tired they were. One said he couldn't remember the last time he slept without dreaming about numbers. The other said he envied people who could just walk away. For the first time, he didn't feel envy toward them. He felt pity. That night, something inside him cracked. He realized that wealth without peace is just another form of debt. It's a debt to your own expectations, to the idea that you must constantly prove you deserve what you have. He remembered his younger self, counting coins, thinking that one day he'd escape the fear. But now, surrounded by people who had everything, he saw that fear had simply changed shape. It didn't disappear, it evolved. And no one was immune. He began studying the habits of the people around him, not their success stories but their silences. The pauses between their words. The small signs of doubt when they thought no one was watching. He saw that most of them weren't driven by ambition anymore. They were driven by anxiety. The fear of falling behind, of losing relevance, of being forgotten. And that's when he understood the truth. Money doesn't fix insecurity, it amplifies it. Whatever you fear when you're poor, you'll still fear when you're rich, just with a different view. He started to pull back. He stopped comparing himself to others and began measuring life by peace, not performance. Some called it slowing down. Others called it losing focus. But he called it freedom. He began to spend time with people who valued stillness over speed, conversations over deals, purpose over profit. For the first time, he felt like he was building something real, something that didn't disappear when the markets changed. Over time, he noticed a different kind of wealth taking shape. The kind that doesn't depend on outcomes or status. The kind that can't be taken away. He realized that happiness isn't about having more, it's about needing less. The people he once idolized were chasing the next level of comfort, but comfort never stopped moving. It was always one step ahead, just out of reach. But peace stayed wherever he chose to keep it. So he made a quiet promise to himself. He would never chase money for the sake of running from fear again. He would earn it, yes, but not at the cost of his mind, not at the cost of his calm. Because the richest lesson he'd ever learned came from the same people he once envied. Even with everything, they still felt the same. And that's when he finally understood that freedom isn't about how much you earn. It's about how little you let your fear control you. The boy who once dreamed of luxury cars and corner offices had finally arrived. His schedule was full, his calendar booked months ahead, his name now spoken in rooms that once ignored him. Yet, with every milestone, he felt the same quiet emptiness growing. The applause was there, but it faded fast. Success, it turned out, had an echo, and once it stopped, the silence was louder than he expected. The thrill of achievement lasted only until the next target appeared. And soon he realized he wasn't chasing dreams anymore. He was running from stillness. He met powerful people, the ones whose decisions could shift markets and headlines. From the outside, they looked invincible. Inside their offices, the air smelled like ambition and anxiety. He started to notice the small things, the tapping fingers during meetings, the constant glances at phones, the way they laughed without smiling. These were people who had won by every measure, yet spoke as if they were losing time. One night, after a long dinner with a billionaire client, he asked quietly, "Does it ever feel like enough?" The man paused for a moment, stared at his untouched glass and said, "Enough is the hardest number to reach." That answer followed him everywhere. Enough. What did it even mean anymore? He remembered when enough meant paying rent without fear, buying groceries without counting coins. Now it was more complex, less visible. His net worth had grown, but so had the weight on his shoulders. The more he earned, the less he trusted the peace it brought. Because deep down he knew it wasn't peace. It was just temporary relief, a pause before the next race began. One morning, he woke up in his high-rise apartment with a view most people would envy. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, but he felt trapped by it. He realized he had spent years climbing, yet never looked around to see what he was climbing for. The boy who once wanted money to feel secure had turned into a man who couldn't feel safe without it. And the cruelest part was he wasn't alone. Every successful person he knew carried the same invisible fear, that one wrong move could send it all crashing down. They called it drive. But really it was fear wearing a better suit. That same week, he visited an old friend from his early days. The man lived modestly, running a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood. No fancy car, no designer watch, no urgent calls to answer. Yet, there was something in his friend's eyes he hadn't seen in a long time: peace. As they sat together, drinking coffee, his friend said, "You know, I used to want what you have. But then I realized, what's the point of having everything if you don't have time to enjoy anything?" The words hit him harder than any business loss ever could. It wasn't envy he felt this time. It was longing. Longing for simplicity. That night he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about that single word: enough. He realized how every part of his life was built around chasing more. Every win demanded another. Every success reset the standard. He wasn't building freedom. He was building a cage. The walls were made of goals and the bars were made of expectations. Somewhere along the way he had mistaken motion for meaning. He had been running so long that he forgot what it was like to just be still. Slowly he started to change. He began to redefine success, not as accumulation but as alignment. He made space for silence even when it scared him. He stopped working on weekends, took long walks without checking his phone, and started listening to the parts of himself he had ignored for years. It felt strange at first, like learning how to breathe again. But with each quiet moment, he began to understand what he had been missing. Freedom wasn't something to be earned, it was something to be allowed. And as time passed, he noticed something new. The more he slowed down, the clearer things became. The people who used to impress him now looked tired. The things he once craved now felt heavy. He started finding joy in small moments: the sound of rain, the warmth of sunlight, the laughter of strangers. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. He wasn't chasing success anymore. He was living it quietly, peacefully, and fully aware. He realized that money, at its best, is a mirror. It reflects who we are when nothing is holding us back. For some, it reveals greed. For others, fear. But for a few, it reveals gratitude. He decided he wanted to be one of the few. Because true wealth isn't in the number you reach, it's in the peace you protect along the way. Success had always looked like the answer. It was the dream that got him through sleepless nights, the reward for every sacrifice. But now, standing at the top of his own mountain, it didn't feel like freedom, it felt like another form of pressure. The long hours, the deals, the endless deadlines, they built a life that appeared perfect from the outside. Yet, inside he felt smaller with every victory. The cage he'd built was polished and expensive, but it was still a cage. And the more he looked around, the more he realized everyone else was locked inside theirs too. In meetings, he saw it in their eyes, the same quiet panic behind every confident smile. The executives and entrepreneurs he worked with weren't celebrating success, they were surviving it. Every day felt like a race they couldn't stop running. Their conversations were rehearsed, their laughter mechanical, their rest non-existent. They spoke about freedom, but none of them lived it. It was as if wealth had turned from a tool into a test, one they could never finish passing. He began to wonder if everyone was chasing the same ghost, peace disguised as profit. One night, after another 14-hour workday, he drove home through empty streets. The city lights blurred through the windshield, glowing like promises that never kept their word. He parked outside his apartment and just sat there, listening to the silence. For the first time, he didn't reach for his phone. He didn't check his messages or open his laptop. He just breathed. And in that stillness, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from pretending you're okay. He realized he wasn't tired from working. He was tired from running. The next morning, he made a choice. He canceled a meeting, something he never did. He turned off his phone and went for a walk instead. No destination, no schedule. Just the sound of his footsteps and the rhythm of his breath. The air felt different, softer. For the first time, he noticed the details: The warmth of the sun on his face, the texture of the ground beneath him, the way the city seemed less intimidating when he wasn't rushing through it. It wasn't a grand revelation. It was a quiet one. But it changed everything. Over time, he began setting boundaries gently but firmly. He stopped saying yes out of fear. He started choosing what truly mattered. He let go of projects that drained him even if they paid well. He spent more time with people who didn't care what he owned. The shift wasn't easy. The world around him didn't slow down. Clients questioned him, peers doubted him, but for once he didn't care. He was no longer trying to prove his worth to anyone, not even to himself. He realized that peace wasn't waiting at the end of the finish line. It was waiting at the start, if only he had learned to stand still. One evening, he found himself at a dinner surrounded by old colleagues. They were still chasing, still competing, still talking about deals like they were lifelines. As he listened, he noticed something different in himself. Their anxiety no longer infected him. Their urgency no longer pulled him in. He wasn't better than them. He was simply done fighting a battle that had no victory. He smiled quietly, grateful for the calm he had built. For the first time, he didn't want to be the most successful person in the room. He just wanted to be the most at peace. That night, walking home under the soft glow of streetlights, he thought about how strange it was that the thing he had been searching for had been with him all along. Freedom wasn't about escaping struggle or reaching wealth. It was about finding balance. Money could make life easier, but it could never make it lighter. Only peace could do that. And peace doesn't arrive when you have everything. It arrives when you finally stop needing everything. He looked up at the skyline, those same glass towers he had once worshipped. They didn't look like dreams anymore. They looked like reminders. Proof that you can build something huge and still feel empty inside. But now he didn't feel envy. He felt understanding. Because true success, he realized, isn't about how high you climb. It's about how quiet your soul feels when you stop climbing. He walked home with that thought, a simple truth echoing in his mind. Wealth without peace is just another kind of poverty. He used to believe money could fix everything. That it could erase the years of struggle, fill the empty spaces in his life, and give him the peace he'd been chasing since he was young. For a long time it seemed true. Every raise, every new deal, every success story felt like progress. But once he reached the summit, he realized something unsettling. The fear was still there. It had just changed its name. Instead of worrying about not having enough, he was now worried about losing what he had. The weight of uncertainty never left. It only dressed itself in luxury. He began to see the same pattern everywhere. People with more than he'd ever imagined, still looking over their shoulders, still restless, still unsatisfied. It wasn't that they didn't have enough. It was that they didn't feel enough. The illusion of wealth promised safety, but it only deepened their dependence on the next milestone, the next purchase, the next distraction. And he realized he had spent years doing the same thing, confusing progress with peace. He thought money would give him meaning. Instead, it gave him noise. Everything changed the day he met a man who had walked away from it all. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't chasing either. He lived simply, running a small design studio, spending his afternoons reading and walking along the river. There was something different about him. He spoke slowly, listened deeply, and laughed without checking the time. Over coffee, he said, "Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy contentment. The moment you stop needing more is the moment you actually become rich." The words landed like a quiet truth he'd been avoiding all along. From that day, he started living differently. He didn't quit his work or reject ambition. He just changed his reason for it. Instead of chasing wealth for security, he worked for purpose. Instead of spending to impress, he spent to express. He found joy in what money couldn't buy: still mornings, honest conversations, long walks without a destination. The emptiness that once lingered began to fade. The anxiety that had lived in his chest for years started to quiet down. And slowly, peace became his new measure of success. He started helping others see what he had discovered. In boardrooms, in coffee shops, in quiet talks after long days, he shared the lesson that took him years to learn. Money is powerful, but it's not magic. It can open doors, but it can't make you walk through them with peace. It can fill your life with things, but not with meaning. He told them that the richest life is the one that feels light to carry. And sometimes that means choosing less. Less noise, less comparison, less chasing. As the years passed, he noticed something beautiful. The more he focused on peace, the more abundance seemed to find him naturally. Not in dramatic ways, but in steady, grounded ones. Work felt fulfilling again. Relationships deepened. The pressure faded. He no longer lived for someday, he lived for today, fully present, fully alive. Money had become what it was always meant to be, a tool, not a tether. One evening, sitting by his window with the city lights glowing below, he thought back to the boy who once dreamed of being rich. That boy believed freedom lived in the high towers and glass offices. But the man he'd become knew better. Freedom wasn't up there, it was within him all along. He smiled, realizing that he hadn't escaped poverty by earning more. He had escaped it by learning that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in peace of mind. He closed his eyes and whispered a quiet truth to himself. The richest people in the world aren't the ones who have the most. They're the ones who need the least. Because when you no longer measure your worth by what you own, you finally understand what it means to be free. And that's how a poor boy who once dreamed of money discovered something far greater: balance. The kind of wealth that stays even when everything else fades. The kind of freedom that doesn't need proof to exist.